Hi, everyone. Today, I'll be talking about our paper, Gender and Participation in Open Source Software Development. Women's participation in software development is well known to be very low when compared to that of men's. What may be surprising, however, is that women's participation appears to be dropping. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics report, the proportion of women computer programmers has dropped from 22.6% in 2016 to 19.5% in 2021. This may be attributed to a number of factors, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet nevertheless, women's participation in tech remains low. Women are underrepresented, and open source is no exception. Open source represents an important digital infrastructure which is integral to scientific and research evolution. It is also a collaborative knowledge-sharing environment where programmers can connect and learn from one another. Open source represents a valuable alternative career path for those without previous programming experience or perhaps without a university education in programming to use the space as a way to experiment and build up their skills in the hopes of eventually contributing to more meaningful projects and possibly receiving paid employment. Open source software has always had a male majority. While this is due to a number of reasons, women's participation has remained around just 5% over the last 10 years. From GitHub's 2021 State of the Octoverse survey, with GitHub being the primary platform for hosting open source software projects, 16 million new users were added in 2021, bringing the total up to 73 million. While not all of these contributors are volunteers who are going unpaid for contributing to open source projects, the gender distribution of respondents still remains very stark, with women making up just 5.9% of contributions, barely an improvement in the last 10 years, despite heavy research and resources poured into this area. This points to a growing need to better understand the participation experiences of women in open source software as compared to men. To do this, we begin with our research questions. RQ1, what motivates women developers as compared with men to initially engage with an open source project? RQ2, what motivates women developers as compared with men to increase their involvement over time? So how did they get further ingrained within the project? And RQ3, what unique experiences do women face at each stage of participation in an open source project? To answer these questions, we conducted interviews with 23 PyPy contributors, with PyPy being a popular package manager for projects in the programming language Python. 11 of the participants were cisgender men, and we also interviewed 12 women contributors, 3 of whom were trans, 9 of whom were cisgender. We talked with participants about their contribution pathways, so their initial interaction with the focal project that they centered most of their contributions around, changes in their participation over time, as well as what caused these changes, and their general positive and negative experiences while contributing to open source software. For our first research question, with regards to initial involvement, both men and women began contributing to an open source project as part of their employment. Amongst the women, however, invitations to the project and using open source as a way to develop their personal skills or hobbies were much more prevalent motivations. As participation increased over time, we saw both men and women participants motivated by a deepening sense of community, their work receiving recognition and being valued, and by addressing project needs. The women in our sample were particularly motivated by serving users of the project, as well as building meaningful relationships with others involved in the community. With regards to unique experiences, while imposter syndrome is something that many of us have experienced in our lives, this feeling of incompetence and self-consciousness was exacerbated in women because they were often the only woman working on a project amongst a sea of all male developers. This contributed to some early participation challenges for women, with visibility pressures and a fear of looking stupid being prominent at the early stages. These visibility pressures led to women using an alias, so refusing to use their name, which might reveal their gender, and using a nickname or just initials to contribute to open source. This also led to some participants hiding their profiles and hiding their online presence in general, as a way of avoiding unwanted online harassment. And this was particularly important for our trans women contributors who felt that their gender identity might make them a more likely target for this harassment. As women began becoming more involved and developing their involvement over time, women began to notice excessive scrutiny for their contributions compared to that of their male developers. This would come in the form of excessive comments or nitpicking on their contributions, which they didn't see in their male co-developers. Many projects had non-inclusive language that led the women in our sample to feel unwelcomed and not included. And maternity leave was a deep factor of contributions over time, as women took their maternity leave as a way of stepping away from open source. And so their contributions obviously dipped during this time. An interesting case was where, because of a woman's time off during maternity leave, work that she was doing that had previously gone unseen was piling up, and this work that her bosses hadn't realized she wasn't doing, and as a result she wasn't being compensated for, became an issue, and upon returning she was able to receive compensation for that work. As far as contributions of this paper and what we can do, this is a qualitative analysis of the differences in women's and men's contribution experiences and open source career trajectories. From our interviews and from listening to our participants, we understand that projects can invite newcomers, create and facilitate mentorship programs, and practice allyship to encourage contributors from underrepresented groups to join. This includes using inclusive language and signals, like a code of conduct that also needs to be enforced. Projects should value invisible, alternative, and non-technical open source work, which often falls on women, and projects should center underrepresented voices and perspectives. Thank you. This project is part of a larger research initiative led by the Ford Foundation and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. You can learn more by going to our project website at diversityandoss.org. Thank you.